Okay, here we are getting ready to do our exam one review. I have several things I'd like to discuss, but we're going to open it up for questions first. So do either of you have any questions?
I'll go ahead and start with my question.
Okay.
My question is, how is the test run? What kind of studying do I need to do? What do I expect with my first exam in your class?
Absolutely. Okay, great question. So when I go to assignments, and hopefully you see this as well, but I see exam one, exam two, and the final exam, right? So each of these exams are worth quite a percentage of your grade. Exam one is worth 15%, so is exam two, and then the final is worth 20. So right there, the exams are worth half the grade in the course, right? So pretty weighty assignments. Each of the exams are similar in that there are two parts, part A, part B. So every exam, part A, is going to have multiple choice questions. It's going to have short answer questions, no code, right? I will give you the hint that there is one question on exam one, part A, where probably every semester I've taught, 75% of the students write a full-blown program, which is not necessary, right? There's a question that asks you to write a defining table. I'll just give that very general hint. You don't need to write a program when a defining table is asked for, right? Don't build a whole web page. The defining table is something we'll review tonight. It's a very good design tool, but it does not mean a program. Okay, so questions on exam or on part A, you could expect a question like, what is the JavaScript keyword to declare a variable, right? And that's a topic that we're covering either this week or next, but you can see there that that's like a short answer type question, right? So you would need to type in the JavaScript keyword to declare a variable. There are also multiple choice questions like, for example, maybe a question is, which one of these is a part of a computer, right? And they would be like CD, flash drive, hard drive, DVD, something like that, right? So for the first 5 weeks, we've covered several topics. We covered computer basics, algorithms, we covered HTML, we covered JavaScript basics, and then next week, the final topic is arithmetic, right? Which is when the exam will be. So you can expect to have multiple choice questions and short answer questions from any of those 5. Now, part B is where you're going to write code, right? Part B of exam 1, of exam 2, and the final exam are all pretty much write a program that meets these requirements, okay? So the program for part 1 is going to be, it's going to be pretty lightweight, or exam 1 is going to be pretty lightweight because we haven't really gotten into a lot of the topics of JavaScript through the first 5 weeks, right? We've learned about design and HTML and just some of the basics, so that for the rest of the exam or the rest of the course, we can really dive into programming concepts, right? So the programs that you write for exam 1, part B, are going to be, I think they're pretty easy. I think you'll do well. Students historically do very well on exam 1, right? And then exam 2 is going to cover 5 new weeks of material plus the first 5 weeks of the course. So it's going to cover everything from the first 5 weeks that exam 1 covered, plus an additional 5 weeks of content. And then the final exam will cover all 14 weeks of the course, right?
Okay. So with the programming, is that open book?
Yes. This is what I'll say. And actually, I'm really hoping that if I click this, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for 1 second because I don't want to show the exam preemptively. But I think there is a description when you click into the exam. And I'm just looking at that right now. Yes. Oh boy. Okay, I will read this to you because this would show you the first question of the exam. But I will tell you that during the exam, you can use W3 Schools, which is a website. You can use a calculator. You can use the textbook. So all of the reading things, anything on Canvas is open, fair game. You can use any of your notes. You can use any of the HTML files that you've already used or created. You can use the previous programs. You can use your favorite text editor. You can validate your HTML, which I recommend because the test does require valid HTML. So the validator at validator.w3.org. But you may not search the internet. You may not work with any person, be it live or via Zoom, and you can't take part of the exam and then come back to it later.
Okay.
Right, so it looks like 2 websites, W3 Schools and W3 Validator, a text editor, any previous or course materials. So in that sense, it's open book, but it's not open book where you can search the internet.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, very well.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing the screen now that the exam is hidden. Okay. So any other questions I can answer before I go through my list?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay.
I had the same question as was asked before about exam structure, but you already answered this.
Wonderful. Okay, if there are any questions, please just feel free to wave your hand or interrupt me or whatever you need to do. This session is here for students and not for me to talk and sound smart. So anyway, here we go. I'm gonna open up the reading for each week. All right, so for example, I'm going to go to now modules. And I will open up anything that says reading would be a very good thing to review, right? Really cool thing about this course, you could purchase the textbook, but the author of the textbook is a current professor at BYU, Idaho, and he makes all of the content from the textbook free on Canvas. So it is the same content, except what's online is more up to date than the textbook, right? So he makes edits every semester. Anyway, there are several questions about chapter 1 in the exam, right? It would be very good for you to go through and remember all the parts of the computer and the things that the computer does, and also some of the calculations like data sizes, right? So you may find a question on the exam that says, if there are 1 million kilobytes, how many gigabytes is that, right? So you need to be able to convert back and forth, and just remember that you can pop this open and use this, right? So you can know that there are 1024 bytes in a kilobyte, and then you can know that a megabyte has this many bytes, right? Or this number divided by 1024 kilobytes, right? So be prepared to do some light computation with that. You should also be prepared. There's a little bit of a trick question on the exam, right? And I'm not going to give it away, but just know that most of the processors in our computers today have multiple cores, which is another way of saying it's like there are multiple processors, okay? So just know that a quad core processor, it's like there are 4 processors. So remember that for the exam, okay? You'll definitely want to know the control structures, right? Execution example is not what I was hoping to talk about. Okay, the control structures, it turns out, is from chapter 2. So any questions about any of the chapter 1 stuff? Okay. So let's go back to modules. And I will now pop open the chapter 2 reading. Okay, what is taught in chapter 2, I think, is the most important skill taught in this class. And that is defining tables, right? So I've worked with several different teams in industry. I've worked with all kinds of people who range from brand new, just out of college developers to developers who have been writing code for 20 years. And the skill that separates the really good developers from the just mediocre developers is the ability to design, okay? And this defining table is a fantastic design tool, right? People, when they are asked to write a program, usually want to dive right in and start writing code immediately, right? And I would say that's a mistake. This defining table allows us to do some design before we write code, because we consider what the input for our program will be, what the program should output, and how we can take these inputs to make this output, right? Imagine if you were asked to go to the kitchen and make a pan of brownies, right? And you didn't get out a recipe, which is basically like your defining table. What if you just got out, well, I know there's chocolate in brownies, so you got out a Hershey's bar. And you said, I know there's flour, so you put some flour on top of the Hershey's bar. And I know that brownies are moist, so there must be water. And you put that in the mixture, and all of a sudden you've got a great big mess, right? Though you had some of the concepts correct, you didn't take time to really think about the process that you need. And that's what happens when we skip the defining table. So I hope that for every program that you students write during this semester, you'll take the time to do a defining table. And we'll practice one here together, okay? But just know that the input generally are the things like the user would enter into a web page, right? So if we had a web page that was going to calculate body mass index, for example, the inputs would be the height and the weight. The output would be a number from the BMI scale that describes a person's BMI. And then the processing would be the calculation of how you get the BMI. A bad description in a defining table would be calculate the BMI. Well, I have no idea how to do that, right? But if I was to be very prescriptive and say BMI calculation formula, if I were to come out here and look for that, I would find a formula, right? So the formula is weight divided by height squared. Okay, so I know that the input for my defining table is going to be height and weight. I know the output is going to be a BMI number, and the processing will be get the height from the user, get the weight from the user. That's step 1, step 2. Step 3, raise the height to the, multiply the height by itself, basically, raise it to the second power. And once you have that value, step 4, divide weight by height squared, right? Step 5, output. So that, what I just did, describes how you calculate BMI, right? Imagine if you got in your car and you were setting out to drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, and you get in your car and you ask your phone for directions to drive to Las Vegas, and your phone just said, drive to Las Vegas, right? That'd be very frustrating. What you need is turn right, get onto the highway, drive for 100 miles, then take exit 362, then proceed for another 100 miles, then take exit 111, right? You need that step by step. And that's what the defining table is trying to get us to do. It's trying to get us to write out the steps for our code before we write any code. So here we go. Here's an example defining table. In order to, let's see, this, you work for a large construction company, your boss asked you to write a computer program that will read a list of openings for a building and compute and output the total cost of all the windows. Okay. So here we have the input would be the width in inches and the height in inches for each window and a list of windows. The output is going to be the total cost for windows. And then the steps we take will be compute area in square foot. And this could be even more explicit and say for each window, multiply height by width. Then sum it together. Then multiply the sum by $35. And then, yeah, sum all of the window costs together. So do either of you have questions about defining tables at this point? Okay. So we're going to do a defining table here in a moment, but another important concept that appears on multiple exams is this idea of control structures, right? Control structures say this is how the lines of code in your program are executed. So usually it just goes from top to bottom in a program, right? That means sequence. So it starts at the top and then it goes to the next line and then the next until it finds the bottom. And this will make more sense at the end of the course, but just know that selection means we'll skip some lines based on some logic, right? Repetition means we will repeat some lines based on some logic. Function call and return means we will skip around from one line to another and then probably come back, right? Try, catch, throw. That's one we won't cover in this course. This is one that trips up a lot of students because we never cover it in this course. But just know these 5 categories describe how the lines of code in your program are executed, right? So how is the list of instructions executed? For example, this recipe is a sequence control structure. You start on step 1. Once step 1 is done, you go to step 2. Once step 2 is done, you go to step 3. Right? So a selection control structure would be like 5, dissolve baking soda in hot water. Or use yeast. I don't know. Some other baking component, right? I'm not a baker. But selection would be like do one or the other of these lines, right? Repetition might be like, okay, stir for 2 minutes. Now stir for 2 minutes again. Now stir for 2 minutes again. You're repeating the instruction multiple times. Function call and return would be like step 1, do this. Now jump down to step number 8. And once you're done, come back up here. And that, of course, would be a very silly thing to do, but that's how function call and return will work for us, okay? So the control structures tell us how the computer will proceed through the lines of code or instructions that we've written. Do either of you have any question on control structures?
No, it's clear for me.
So it's just the definition of what they are is what we need to know.
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. We will spend a whole week, actually week 6 is dedicated to the idea of selection. Weeks 7 and 8 are dedicated to repetition, right? And I think weeks 10 and 11 are dedicated to function call and return. So like we're going to deep dive in those, but you just need to know that those are control structures. right? And you don't really even need to know, well, I'm giving stuff away, but just know that those are control structures. Any other question?
Looks good.
Okay. So now we've got these review questions here, and I'd like to pick one and create a defining table. Well, first let's do this, right? I've got you two here on the line. This question is not on the exam, and there are no questions like this on the exam, but understanding what parts of the defining table these are would be very good. So it wants you to identify each of these lines as either input, processing, or output, right? So for example, we've got a sentence here that says we need to multiply overtime hours by regularly hours wage by 1.5 to get overtime pay, or in other words, use this formula. So does this look like input, output, or processing to you?
Processing.
Processing,
Because
right.
there's a process.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this one? Subtract tax from gross pay to get
Processing.
net pay.
Yeah,
Also processing. Very good. Okay, how about overtime hours?
That would be input. Because they're supposed to enter it. Someone is supposed to enter it.
Yep, exactly right. What about net pay?
Output.
Output, exactly right. Very good. Yes, this whole program takes in these things as input: regular hours, regular hourly wage, overtime hours, and then it does all this processing in order to get net pay. So that was very good. So now let's do this defining table. Our company needs a program to compute the amount to charge customers for mowing their lawns for an entire season. So an employee will type in the total area of the customer's lawn in square feet. Our company charges 1 cent per square foot to mow a lawn one time, and will mow each lawn once a week for 15 weeks. Match each of the following parts of the problem. Nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to build the defining table. So I'm going to pop open Notepad++ here. And when I see a defining table, I actually want to see it like, sorry, I'm going to delete all of this. So usually when we see a defining table in code, it's just going to have a couple parts, right? And I'm going to write these are HTML comments. No, they're not. I need a script. So pay no attention to this. This is not necessary when you write a defining table. Just know that there should be an input section, there should be an output section, and there should be a processing section. Okay, so what are the inputs for this program? There are several, right? For one, we need to know the area of a customer's lawn in square feet. We need to know the rate, the charge rate, so 1 cent per square foot. And we need to know the number of weeks that we will mow the lawn, right? So right there, I see that there are 3 inputs, right? So input number 1, and
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
So where the cost and the number of weeks are constants, do we consider that an input?
You know, that's a good question. I think we could not consider it an input and be just fine.
Okay, so
Right.
I could just include that as part of the processing. It wouldn't necessarily need to be part of an input.
Exactly right.
And sorry, one more. So is input limited to to what needs to be technically input into a program, you know, or a text field, you know, sort of
Yeah.
input?
Yeah, I will tell you that for the first several weeks of the course, we're going to write defining tables for our entire program. But it's going to happen that you're going to write smaller bits of the program that do one specific thing called the functions, and you can write a defining table for that too. Yep, but you're exactly right. For now, it's just the inputs for the program, or in other words, the stuff that the user will input into the HTML web page.
Okay.
Right, so that was a good call out, and I think for now we will just say input is square footage of lawn. Right, and we'll make those other things constants in our program. So what is the output going to be in this program?
The cost.
Yeah, it's cost for lawn care for the season. Right? So it's not just a one-time mow, it's the cost for the entire season. Okay. So if you were going to sit down with Excel, or if you're going to do this with pencil and paper, what would you do? Right? What are the steps that you would take here? So step number 1. Let me make it so we can see these instructions a little better. So step number 1, we need to, and this will make more sense when you write HTML inputs and get them out of the HTML document with JavaScript. But step number 1 is to get the square footage of the lawn, right? Or in other words, go to the HTML document, pull it out, store it in a variable. Okay? After we get the square footage of the lawn, what would you do next?
Let's go multiply by 1 cent.
Multiply
4.01.
square footage by 0.01. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, and then after we do that, we would probably want to, so this will give us how much we have in, or how much it costs for a one-time mow, but we know that we're going to do this 15 times. So we want to multiply
By 15, yeah.
by 15, right? So one thing that's going to help you, like this is sufficient. This would get you 100% credit on your program, but this would not help you very much translate into code. So we're going to add a couple things, right? Get the square footage of the lawn from the HTML and store it in a variable. Okay, multiply square footage by 1 cent and store it in a variable called one-time cost. And then we can do things like multiply one-time cost by 15 and store it in a variable called season cost or something like that. And then we want to output the season cost to the user on the HTML. Right, so this we can take line by line then, and we can come in here and we can start writing JavaScript code. Right, so we can say something like var square footage is equal to document.get element by ID, and then we're going to look for an element called square footage, and then we're going to pull out the value. Right, at this point we realize, oh, we only have a string, and this is something that we're going to learn next week, is how to turn strings into numbers so we can do math. So anyway, I hope this helps. It doesn't hurt to be as verbose as possible when creating a defining table. The more verbose you are, the easier it will be for you to write your code. Okay, that was chapter 2. Any questions on that before we move on?
Nope.
Okay, so let's go to chapter 3. So chapter 3 is where we covered HTML. And it, as I said in the announcements, the purpose of this course is not to teach you HTML, right? You're probably going to take a web design course where you'll learn more HTML and CSS and things like that. The purpose of the HTML we learn here is so that we can make the JavaScript understandable, right? It's kind of difficult to write JavaScript and see it in action without HTML, right? So this week, chapter 3 was dedicated to learning HTML so that we can learn JavaScript, just the bare minimum of HTML to learn JavaScript, right? But there are some important lessons we learn here. We learn about the HTML tags, right? So this is absolutely something you should refer to during the exam. This by no means is a full list of the HTML tags, but these are the ones that you can count on using week in, week out for your programs, right? A lot of HTML tags have an opening tag and then a closing tag, but not all of them, right? For example, there's no closing tag for an input, right? HTML elements, they have attributes. So if I highlight this line of code right here, can you tell me what the 3 attributes of this HTML element are?
So you're asking me, right? Or you're asking us?
You too, yes.
Okay. So the attributes are the type, that being text,
Yep.
right? The ID, which is the name.
Yep.
That we're going to refer to it as, and I'm unfamiliar with size, but I'll assume it's the size of the font.
There you go. Very good. Exactly right. Those are all attributes of an HTML element, right? And there are many, many attributes for HTML elements. In fact, if you were to go to W3 Schools and just look for HTML attributes, like, oh man, we're going to find a list that's a mile long here, right? Like, there are so many. If you wanted to create an image, for example, you would use the image tag, but in order to make the image display something, you need to use the source or SRC attribute, right? So there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of attributes. So know the difference between HTML elements or tags and HTML attributes. Okay. HTML, like I said in my review videos that I post in the announcement, it's kind of like a Russian nesting doll, right? And one doll fits within another doll, which fits in within another doll, and anyway, it's hierarchical, right? So if you look at this HTML, we've got an HTML opening tag and an HTML closing tag. This is like our outer layer. And then within that, we have other nested tags that are further down in the hierarchy, right? You've got a head section and a body section. Those 2 tags have to exist on every HTML document. And then within the head tags, we have further things within the hierarchy, right? A meta tag and a title tag. So just know that HTML is hierarchical. Here's an example HTML document, right? A couple paragraphs, we've got a heading. This title is what makes text appear in the tabs of your browser. And one of the important things that is excluded from a lot of these examples is the script section. So the script section always goes within the head. The script section is where we write our JavaScript. Okay, so let's take a look at these common mistakes. For example, right here, we've got the start of an HTML tag, but we don't have the closing bracket. You can see the closing bracket right here. So remember your opening and closing angle brackets when creating HTML elements, right? Likewise, attributes need to be within the HTML tag, but also within quotation marks. Okay, so let's come down here and do some of these. It looks like these two were the ones that everyone did for their assignment. So now we're going to do this one, create and validate a well-formed HTML5 document that tells a short version of my life story. So something that I would suggest, and I think that you're asked to do this week or next week, is to have a template, a starting point for each one of the programs that you will write, right? There's no reason why you need to write the HTML opening and closing tag every week, right? Just have something ready to go that's like this that you can copy and paste into a new HTML document. Okay. What I like to do is I like to have on one side, oh, where is my option here? Open containing folder. So on one side, I've got my code. On the other side, I've got my preview, right? So I'm going to come in here and I can see that title shows up in my browser tab. I'll close some of my other tabs so we can see that better. Now I'm going to come here and I'm going to write Bro Davidson's Sweet Life. Right? Save, reload. And we can see now that that appears in the title, Bro Davidson's Sweet Life. So we were asked to do a short life history. The page needs to include 2 paragraphs and a heading. All right, so pop quiz time. I need to add a heading. Where should I add this heading?
In the body.
In the body. Right here.
No. That's definitely not there.
Sorry.
That's the body tag.
Very good. Very good. Yep. I was being annoying on purpose. I'm sorry. I'm a little.
That's okay. I like correcting people, so that made me feel good.
There you go. There you go. Okay, I have added a heading. Right. There are lots of different headings. In the H stands for heading, and the 1 stands for the big 1. Just kidding. I don't know what it stands for, but an H1 is the biggest, with an H5 being the smallest. So I could have subheadings on my page, which I'm going to do. All right, so pre-mission life, post-mission life, and maybe I'll add one here because I'm an overachiever. I'll do mission life. All right, let's see what this does to our page. It's very important that you save, and then I come here and refresh my page, and I see my typos. I didn't ever put a big heading tag here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Bro Davidson's Sweet Life. Save that, reload the page, and there you can see the difference between an H5 and an H1. Right, so now I need to add paragraphs. I'm going to do that here. One thing to note is tags are case sensitive. This is not a valid HTML tag with a capital P, right? And that's not a valid HTML tag, though I didn't do that on purpose. So I was born in Idaho. I ate potatoes for the first 19 years of my life. There we go. Mission life. I served my mission in Mexico. I ate tacos for 2 years of my life. Right, and then post-mission life. I live in Idaho Falls and am eating more potatoes again. Right. So here's my web page. Let's take this over and let's validate. So I want to go to validator.w3.org. Right, and a very important thing to note is this completely ignores all the JavaScript that we will write every week, right? Some people write a program that's incomplete or doesn't work, and they come to me and they say, Brother Davidson, but I put it through the W3 validator and it was valid HTML. Well, that's fine. I mean, there's a difference between valid HTML and a working JavaScript program. So please know that this only looks at HTML. It completely ignores all JavaScript. So I can paste in my HTML here. I can check. And it tells me document checking completed, no errors or warnings to show. So yay me. All right, so now I'm going to make a mistake here and delete the closing paragraph tag. With that closing paragraph tag, and I refresh my page still appears to function, right? It looks like it's doing everything it needs to. But if I come back here and I try and validate this HTML, I should see an error. I should see an error. Huh. Well, how about that? Go ahead. I've just authorized a drink for my son who's out of bed, so you'll be happy to know that. All right, well, apparently I don't know how to trigger an error in W3 validator, but just know if you have, for example, a missing meta tag, that should trigger an error. This is not my night. Missing HTML tag? Doc type? Question mark? There we go. This is what an error looks like, right? So it even tells us, I was expecting to see the doc type HTML tag at the beginning of your document, right? So valid HTML all around, or whatever you feel like, apparently. Okay, so that's what I'd like to cover for chapter 3. Any questions about this HTML? Okay. So let's now talk about chapter 4. So chapter 4 is JavaScript basics, right? Chapter 4 is where we really start getting into some of the cool stuff about this course. We learn the most repeated line of code in the course, and that is, of course, the document.getElementById. So as we said, all JavaScript needs to exist within an HTML tag. That is the script tag, right? So this just tells our HTML page, we're changing languages right now. I'm going to stop speaking HTML for a second, and I'm going to speak JavaScript, right? We used to have to add an attribute that said this is the type of script, but now modern browsers know that and default to any script, they know it's JavaScript, right? Unless otherwise specified. So remember to always have script tags within the head tags, okay? So this is where we start to see the control structures, right? We go from the top of our script to the bottom of our script. Oh, look, a lovely defining table. So nice. Okay. Script is executed by the HTML. So we learn a new attribute here. It's the on click, right? So basically when this button is clicked or on click, we're going to execute some JavaScript called show message, right? We can look up here, we can see inside of our script tag, there's this function keyword that says, hey, here's a block of JavaScript code, use the show message function, right? So little history on JavaScript. Read this one time and then forget it. It's the, anyway, but you'll want to know how to make comments in JavaScript, right? A single line comment is done with those with a double slash. A multi-line comment is with a slash star. I'll show you the difference now. Right? So if I write a comment, I'll be like input. But then if I go to the next line and just type processing, this is no longer, you can see Notepad++ gives me a hint here. It highlights this to be green, but this is not green, right? So this processing, because it's not within a comment, the computer thinks it's JavaScript, right? So if I want to do a multi-line comment, I can do that. And then everything within these comments, whether it's on the same line or not, is a comment. So input, processing, output. Notepad++ highlights it all as green. This is all HTML comments, and or JavaScript comments is what I should say. And these are ignored, right? These are like notes. Okay, JavaScript statements, they always end with a semicolon. And remember that JavaScript is case sensitive. Here we learn about variables. One thing that's super important to note is that a variable always has a type, a name, and a value. And then we learn about getting values out of text. This, again, is the most important, or maybe not the most important, but the most repeated line of code in all of your programs. I'm not saying get a tattoo, but if you were to get a tattoo, I would get this line of JavaScript code tattooed on your arm right here, right? Because you're going to use this line of JavaScript all the time. Okay, When you're declaring variables, don't use any of these words because these are all the reserved or keywords in JavaScript, right? And now, any questions on that before we go write a program?
No.
One thing I don't think we covered was the pop-up windows. There are 3 types of pop-up windows. There's one that just displays information. There's one that displays information. Where are they? Where are you? All right, well, let's do this. W3 schools HTML pop-up. How to create pop-ups. There's a couple different ways. This is not the page we're looking for. This is not the droids we're looking for. JavaScript pop-up boxes is what I should have. So there's alert, confirm, and prompt. Let's see the difference of those right there, right? So I'm going to do first an alert. When I do an alert, I need to create a string. Strings are always within single or double quotes. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm going to come back to my page. Right when we load the page, we should see this pop up. Oh, that's so annoying. Pop-ups. Get out of here. So that's an alert. A confirm is just slightly different. Notice that on, I'm not going to reload, well, yeah, I am going to reload the page, but notice that now we have an OK button and a cancel button. Whereas with an alert, we just had an OK button, right? That's because with a confirm, we can get the result of their click. We can write this out to the console. I'm going to come here, I'm going to click cancel. Then if I hit F12 in Google Chrome, it brings up the console. It tells me the console false. So I clicked cancel, and so it was like, nope, he did not agree. Whereas if I reload the page and click OK, I should see true. Right, so that's the difference between confirm and alert. And then finally prompt. Hi everyone, what's your name? Contraction. And we have to escape them. What the deal is. All right, no contraction. Hi everyone, what's your name? Bro Davidson. And you can see that a prompt is used to get input from a user from a pop-up window, right? So we called the prompt function. I typed Bro Davidson. The prompt function gave us a value back. We put it in this variable, and then we used the value in that variable to write out to the console. There's your 3 pop-ups. Okay, so let's create a program now. So a couple of these programs you got to do as assignments. So let's do this one. Let's do an address as they are here in the USA, right? So we're going to ask for 5 text fields, one for street address 1, street address 2, city, state, and zip code. And then we're going to get all of those pieces of information and we're going to combine them into an address. Any questions about the assignment before we go ahead and program that? Okay. Well, here we go then. So I'm going to say street address 1, and then I'll create an input, and we'll set its type equal to text. Input type equal text is very important because this input tag is also used for things like checkboxes and radio buttons. So, and then the ID is going to be important because it makes this unique. So I'm going to say txt street 1. And then I'm going to use a special HTML tag that's a break so that stuff doesn't all stay on the same line. Remember that above all else, a programmer is lazy, so copy and paste is your friend, right? It's just important that I make these IDs unique. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for you to go try and find an address and drive down the street and then see 2 houses that have the exact same house number on them. So these IDs, you need to be unique, like house numbers on a street. Okay, next will be city. So I just copied that and pasted again, and we will say city. Let's do this again and say state. Okay, and finally, postal code. Okay, and we also need a button to click so that when we click this button, this address gets combined, all right? Let's go ahead and do that. It may seem a little silly to put a type on this button and say, hey, this button is a button, right? That sounds like you're talking to a 4-year-old, right? But just know that there are multiple types of buttons. So this is basically just saying this is a regular old button. And then we're going to say on click, we want something to happen. So we're going to create a JavaScript function called make address. And then in order for some text to show up inside of the button, we're going to say do it. All right, so I'm going to reload our HTML page here. This is what it looks like now. So I'm going to click this button and nothing happens except I keep getting this error. Uncaught reference error, make address is not defined. So this is kind of gives me some information. It's more like it gives me some clues and asks me to figure it out myself, right? But note that when I have the Google Chrome Developer Tools console open, it notes my file name, secondhalf.html. You can see that matches my file name. And then it has a number after that. This number is the line in my program where it encountered an error. So you can see here I'm coming down. This is my line numbers over here on the left. It says on line 17, an error occurred. And that's because we're calling a make address function that doesn't exist yet. Right? So if I come up here and I add this function make address, right, save that, reload the page, and now when I click this button, no error, but also nothing happens. Right? So now let's write a bunch of code without designing anything. Just kidding. It's a terrible idea. Don't do that. Let's write a defining table. Right? So I'm going to do a multi-line comment here. Let's do the input. Let's do the processing. And let's do the output. Okay, so what are the inputs to this program?
Oh, the addresses field that we have written. Street 1, street 2, city, postal code, state.
Very good. Okay, what is the output of this program?
Address combined.
Complete address, I like that. Okay, and how are we going to do this? What is the processing steps? What are the processing steps?
To add all address together.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good description of what we should do, but again, we want to be very verbose and say how we're going to do it, right? So it may look like this. Get street 1 from HTML, from the HTML, and store it in a variable. And then I'm going to say get street 2 from the HTML and store it in a variable. Get city from the HTML. Variable. Get state. Blah, blah, blah. Get postal code. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Then I might do something and say combine street 1 with street 2. Combine that with city. And combine that with state. And so forth, right? And then I will output the address to. Okay. So a cool thing I can do now is I can take all of these lines from my defining table. I'm going to paste them right here inside of my function. I'm going to write a comment first, of course. I'm not going to do that. So step 1, get street 1 from the HTML and store it in a variable. Right? So I know I need to create a variable, let. I'm going to call this variable street 1, and then I'm going to get this variable from the HTML. So in order to do that, remember my tattoo, right? Document.get element by ID. Remember, HTML elements should have a unique ID attribute. This is the one I'm concerned with. And then I'm going to pull the value out of that HTML once I found it. And just to verify that I'm doing everything correctly here, I'm going to do a console.log street1. Okay, and before I do that, I better go back and make all of these single line comments, or else somebody's going to yell at me. Okay, let's come here. Let's reload the page. I'm going to write 123 easy street and click the button. And you can see that 123 easy street now shows up in the console. And that's because we correctly got the street 1 from the HTML and stored it in a variable. So I hope you can see how this line of code that seemed like maybe it was a little verbose helped us write this line of code, and now we have a pretty good map of what we need to do for the rest of the program, right? So once again, programmers are lazy. I'm going to come here and copy paste, but it's important that variables be unique. And I have a bug in my program right now. Before I show you what this bug is? Can anyone tell me what this bug is? No worries.
Oh, you didn't change the name from street 1 to street 2.
Oh, very
No.
good. Very good. Yes. So that is exactly right. I will show you what will occur if I were to do 1, 2, 3, easy street apartment 103C. And if I click this button, I would expect to see those two lines of text in my console, but instead I see 1, 2, 3 easy street twice. Right? So this is a very common mistake for students to make. I know that it's going to happen. It happens every semester. It's okay to copy and paste, but just like Artem said, we need to make sure we are pulling the right thing, right? I have a unique element, but I'm pulling it twice and putting it into two different variables. So we fix that by saying text street 2. Okay, let's reload. 1, 2, 3 easy street apartment 103C. And now I see those in my console. Okay. So now I feel confident in what I'm doing. I'm going to get rid of these console.log statements. And I'm just going to come through here and I'm going to go line by line through my process or my defining table. Right. And I'm going to change. One cool thing about Visual Studio Code and about Notepad++ is it does syntax highlighting. So I know I've gotten the ID correct because it highlights it above and below. If I had misspelled city and I went to highlight it, well, it's not going to highlight text city down here, right? Which tells me maybe something's wrong. Okay. So now I'll get the state, txt state. Okay, now I'll get the postal code. Okay, well, I'm just about through. So now I'll go ahead and combine. I'll store these in a variable and I'll call it complete address. So one thing we learned during chapter 4 is a basic of JavaScript is what's called string concatenation or combining strings into a new string. So I'll do that now. Street 1 plus street 2 plus city plus state plus postal code. Okay, I've got a little bit of a bug here in my program. 10 points for Gryffindor if you can tell me what it is. All right, so watch the console here. You'll see that we don't quite have the format correct, right? It's combined my city, my street 2, my postal code all together. I would expect that to be formatted a little better. Right, so something we can do is we can actually use HTML to solve this problem. And I can do some more string concatenation here to do a break tag. Okay. I also want to output this to the HTML document, so I'm going to write a div. A div is basically just like a container. You can put anything in it. So I will come here and say output the address to the user, document.get element by ID. I want to search for the output element. Then I want to set the inner HTML to complete address. Save that, reload our page here. Okay, and now you can see we have nicely formatted address. So, okay. And that is through week four. So week 5 is next week, where we learn arithmetic, and I don't think it would make a lot of sense for us to review that right now. But anyway, do you have any questions before we finish, Artem?
No, it's clear. Thanks for showing the example.
Okay. Okay, very good. Well, we'll end there, and I wish you the best, and all of you, on the exam.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for your help, and it's more clear now how to make a good structure.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, have a good day.
Thanks. You too. Bye bye.